Hi, I'm Kaylin. They said I was unstable, emotional, too soft to lead. They stripped my name from the company I helped build, cut me out of photos, turned my ideas into theirs, and told the world I left because I couldn't handle the pressure. But what if I told you I never left? That while they were mocking me from the boardroom, I was quietly buying it out, piece by piece. They called me a failure for walking away. But now, my startup owns everything they built. Makes you wonder, how far will family go to bury the daughter who dared to say no? The moment I stepped out of the Uber, the wind in downtown Dallas hit me like an unwelcome greeting. The valet opened the car door with a plastic smile, one I didn't bother returning. I adjusted the black dress I'd worn for too many boardroom wars and not enough celebrations, then looked up at the glittering banner strung across the entrance. Darwin Holdings, 50 years of legacy. Legacy. What a selective word. Inside, the ballroom pulsed with the clinks of crystal and curated laughter. People moved in clusters, each pocket like a closed circle of inherited power. I walked alone through them. No husband on my arm, no assistant trailing behind. Just me, the daughter who once ran their creative department, and now, in their eyes, ran nothing at all. I headed toward the section labeled Reserved Family and Executives. I slowed down instinctively, not for grace, but caution. At the first table, my brother Brannon caught sight of me. He leaned back in his chair, casually lifting his whiskey. "There's no card with your name," he said, loud enough for a few heads to turn. "But hey, feel free to grab a seat near the interns." That wasn't a suggestion. It was a placement. I stood there for half a second too long. Then I smiled, tight-lipped, and turned toward the back row of tables, where the lighting was dimmer, and the staff refilled water glasses without asking. I sat, alone. Funny how they always forget the ones who used to build things. I remembered designing their original brand guidelines in a freezing WeWork space when the company had fewer than 20 employees. I remembered staying up until 3 a.m., formatting pitch decks, Brandon's name on every slide, mine left in metadata. Tonight, though, I wasn't invisible. I was just inconvenient. The MC took the stage and welcomed everyone with the usual polish. Then came the slideshow, 50 years of builders. Photos of board meetings, team retreats, product launches flickered across the massive screen. And then, there it was, the family photo. We'd taken it 5 years ago on the company's 45th anniversary. I remembered the heat, the sweat, how I'd stood between Brannon and our mother Valora. But on the screen, I wasn't there, literally cropped out. The empty space where I once stood had been covered by a graphic overlay of the company's mission statement. Valora leaned over, smelling of Chanel and veiled judgment. "They used the latest branding version," she whispered. "Don't take it personally." I didn't. I took notes. As Brannon took the stage to deliver his speech, all tailored suit and toothy confidence, I studied the crowd. Their expressions didn't change when he threw around phrases like innovation pipeline and visionary alignment, phrases I'd coined. I watched Zinnia, my sister-in-law, and the company's PR queen, nod with exaggerated delight as he thanked her for the brand's voice. She once told me I lacked the tone for public messaging. I didn't move, didn't fidget. My smile stayed where it was, fixed. The same smile I'd worn when they forced me to sign the silent exit agreement 2 years ago. I didn't want to cause a scene. I wanted them to forget I was watching. They always talk about knives and backs, but no one ever warns you about the sting of being deleted, the kind of pain that doesn't draw blood, just silence. You're not yelled at, not shoved out the door. You're just not invited back in. I once read a quote that stuck with me. "It's not the knife they stab you with that hurts. It's the one they say didn't happen." My mind slipped to that meeting, the one where my seat was pulled before I even sat down. No raised voices, just polite language and premature goodbyes. As the crowd clapped for Brannon, I took a sip of my now warm champagne. The bubbles had gone flat, like the air around me. And then, something small. A voice. "Weren't you one of the original brand directors?" I turned. It was a girl. Couldn't be more than 24. Her badge read, "Marketing Intern." Her tone wasn't mocking. It was genuine curiosity, maybe even admiration. For the first time that night, I felt heat behind my eyes. Not anger, not shame. Something closer to confirmation. I leaned in slightly, my voice calm. I was. That moment reminded me, silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. As I stepped out of the gala into the cool Dallas night, the words from that intern echoed louder than the clinks of champagne glasses and rehearsed applause still ringing behind me. "Weren't you one of the original brand directors?" That one question, quiet, genuine, cut deeper than all the false smiles and polished indifference I'd endured inside. It reminded me that being unseen didn't mean I was unimportant, just inconvenient. The next morning, the scent of overripe magnolia clung to the air at my mother's estate. The staff opened the double doors without knocking. That always unsettled me. The way this house moved around me like I didn't belong in it anymore. Or perhaps never did. Valora sat in the sunroom, wrapped in silk like she hadn't aged a minute since her debutante days. Her eyes scanned the brunch table as if it were a centerpiece arrangement, not a meal. I'd barely taken 2 steps into the room when she waved toward the chair across from her. "Kaylin, sweetie," she began, her voice already dipped in something syrupy and calculated. "You look tired. Did you sleep at all after last night's little gathering?" I didn't respond. Just slid into the chair, nodding at the maid who poured me tea. "I watched you, you know," she continued, lifting her cup delicately. "Standing in the back, by the floral walls. You really should wear more color. Black makes you look like staff." I stirred my tea slowly, refusing to give her the rise she always hunted for. She leaned forward just slightly. "Sometimes, darling, you have to let the men run the show. You're so talented. But not for this kind of world." There it was. The script, recited with perfect pacing, and that same theatrical care she used in society luncheons or charity auctions. I looked at her without blinking. "This kind of world," I repeated softly, "is built by women like me. You just don't see it unless our names are stitched onto cocktail napkins." Her smile didn't falter. That was her gift, never break character. She reached across the table, lightly touching my wrist. "Just don't come to the next board meeting. You know how your father gets when there's tension. Let Brannon have his space. Let the boys do what they do best." Manipulation, I thought. Spin stories. Steal credit. Twist truth into narrative. Instead, I said nothing. Because my silence? It wasn't surrender. It was loading a weapon. I left without finishing my tea. She called after me from the porch. "Just think about what's best for the family, Kaylin." Later that week, I picked up Mireille from school. Zinnia had some PR crisis, which I could only assume meant she was too busy crafting a viral apology for something tasteless to attend a parent-teacher lunch. Mireille ran into my arms, her pink backpack swinging behind her, cheeks flushed from recess. "Auntie Kay, are we going to paint again tonight?" she chirped as we drove toward my place. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice light. We spent the evening surrounded by coloring books and watercolor splashes on my kitchen floor. Her laughter filled the spaces in my apartment that had long been quiet. And then, between 2 brushstrokes, she dropped it. "Why don't you go to work like Daddy?" she asked innocently, tilting her head. "He said you're still finding yourself." I paused, brush midair. Mireille looked up at me, waiting, her eyes reflecting none of the malice, none of the venom from the adults who fed her that narrative. I smiled, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. Sometimes, grown-ups forget that not all work comes with a name tag and a parking spot. She nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense in her 7-year-old world. Later that night, once she was asleep on my couch, wrapped in her unicorn blanket, I powered up my laptop. The screen glowed against the dark. My inbox chimed. Stone River's legal team had sent over the latest transfer forms. A proxy sale. Small, but essential. I whispered aloud to myself, voice low and even. I don't want revenge. I want accuracy. I scrolled down to the attachment, heart steady. The headline read, Confirmed. Stone River now holds 3.2% voting shares via blind trust vehicle. Stealth acquisition successful. It was just a small percentage, but it was my first key in their locked empire. I still remember the way the conference room smelled that day. Leather chairs, burnt coffee, and the faint cologne Brannon always wore too much of. The air was heavy, but not with tension. With finality, like everyone else had already rehearsed the script except me. 2 years ago, almost to the week, they called it a family realignment. That was the term Brannon used in the meeting invite, as if I was a piece of misplaced furniture, not their vice president. Darvin sat at the head of the table, stone-faced. Beside him, Valora pretended to scroll her phone, eyes darting up every few seconds just to ensure I was still sitting quietly. Brannon lounged across from me, all smug smiles and expensive watch glints, and Zinnia, well, she didn't even bother pretending she wasn't enjoying this. I want to get ahead of this, Darvin said, sliding a manila folder across the glossy surface. It's not personal, Kaylin. It's strategic. I opened the folder slowly. A transition agreement, legalese cloaked in civility. But the lines were clear. No position, no equity, no recognition of prior work. Just an elegant ejection, and not a single sentence of thanks. Brannon didn't say a word. He kept tapping his pen against the edge of the table, a rhythm I used to find comforting during tense meetings. Now it felt like a countdown. Zinnia leaned in slightly, her voice low but clear enough to hear. Clean exits protect everyone. The board likes quiet endings. And Valora, always the one to twist the blade with a smile, added, Sign it quickly, darling. We wouldn't want this to become unnecessarily complicated. I looked at the line where my name was typed. My hand didn't shake. I signed. As I handed the folder back, I smiled. Not out of surrender, but because I finally understood something. Sometimes survival looks like retreat. But I wasn't out. I was simply going underground. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I'd already begun something else. Something quiet. Something mine. A week before that meeting, I had made one last plea. I asked the board to give me 20 minutes, just 20, to present a new market strategy I'd spent months developing. It was lean, scalable, innovative, and tailored for the demographic the company had been too proud to acknowledge. I'd even preemptively cut costs. They granted the time, barely. 5 minutes in, Darvin raised a hand. We're not here to chase ideas, he said. We're here to preserve legacy. No one protested. Not even the junior VP I mentored for 3 years. I closed my laptop gently, not because I was finished, but because they'd never intended to listen. They weren't rejecting my idea. They were deleting me mid-sentence. That evening, after slipping out of the building for what I knew would be the last time, I went home, unplugged from the company Slack, archived my internal notes, and deleted my badge ID profile. Then, I opened a fresh Google Doc and typed 4 words at the top. Project Stone River, Phase 1. I sat back in my chair and let the weight of the silence settle. No one called to ask where I went. No one emailed to check in. I wasn't surprised. I'd read somewhere once, the most powerful plans are born in rooms where no one listens. And that's where I began rebuilding. Tonight, as I sat at my dining table, the same one I used to pull all-nighters on for their presentations, I pulled out a worn copy of the contract they made me sign. The ink was still sharp, the language still patronizing, but it read differently now, because I had the numbers, I had the ownership, and I had the one thing they feared most, momentum. I tapped the folder twice and whispered to no one in particular, You thought you wrote me out. Turns out you just signed your own checkmate. The spreadsheet was boring until it wasn't. I'd been scanning internal allocations from Darwin Holdings, reports passed through Stone River's acquisition proxy. Most of it was routine: payroll ratios, vendor disbursements, typical expense buffers. Then, one entry snagged me. Line 237, Q3, 2020. Branding revision fee, $48,000, D Creative Systems. I didn't need to check twice. That line was mine. Not figuratively, literally. I wrote that entire campaign structure during my final year at the company. I even named the file Vision 2030 Rebrand. They changed 2 fonts and had the gall to refile it under Brandon's name. That would have been enough to make me shake my head. But what came next in my memory? That still burns. I'd pitched my startup, Stone River, to a trusted investor a few months after I left. I'd known him since my first year at Darwin Holdings. We'd shared panels, exchanged late-night emails about industry trends, even toasted each other's wins. He'd seemed interested, impressed even. Told me, "Let me talk to my partner. We'll circle back this week." I never heard from him again. 3 days later, a colleague from another firm called me, her voice low, cautious. "I shouldn't say this," she began, "but you need to know. Darwin reached out to them, said you'd been unstable since leaving, that your departure wasn't exactly voluntary." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mouth had gone dry, but not from shock, from confirmation. They weren't just pushing me out. They were making sure I couldn't rebuild elsewhere. They didn't just want me out, I whispered to myself. They wanted me erased. It's funny, in business, how rarely failure comes from incompetence. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet call from the wrong person to the right inbox. That night, I made another kind of call, to an external firm that specializes in digital forensics. I gave them one name, Zinnia, and a keyword to search in all archived communication: mine. 3 weeks passed. Then an encrypted file hit my inbox. Buried in it was an email chain, Zinnia to a prospective brand partner. "We've seen Kaylin's deck," she wrote. "It's imaginative but directionless. Think, hobbyist energy, just a heads up." Hobbyist, that word, deliberate, patronizing, and so very Zinnia. I read the email again, slower. The timestamp matched the week of my investor silence. I didn't shout. I didn't slam anything. I just sat there and whispered, "Funny, that hobbyist now holds 3.2% of your voting shares." I forwarded the message to my legal team with the subject line, "Reputation tampering filed." The next morning, I met with outside counsel in a discreet office in uptown Dallas. Nothing flashy, just stone floors, soft lighting, and lawyers who didn't talk unless it counted. We discussed the non-defamation clause in my exit paperwork. Every word mattered now. "If they go public, we go legal," my attorney said, adjusting his glasses. "But for now, stay quiet. Let them underestimate you." I leaned back, crossing my arms. They've always mistaken silence for surrender. I left the meeting and drove straight to my office. Not the one they stripped me of, the one I built. 30 floors above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows, a name on the lease no one else thought to trace: KD Capital Holdings. I stood in front of the glass and looked out. This wasn't revenge. This was recall. Every lie they'd told, every whisper they spread, documented, dated, cataloged. The phone on my desk buzzed. "Ms. Dunning," my assistant said, "your strategy call is patched in." I picked up. A calm voice spoke. "The voting block you wanted, 4.8% now. Shadow shares secured." I didn't say a word. I just looked out over the skyline. We weren't knocking on the door anymore. We were turning the key. When you've built something from the bones of your insomnia, you remember every detail, every margin, every typeface, every metaphor that carried the weight of your voice when the room wouldn't let you speak. That's why I noticed it immediately. I was sorting through archived presentations from Darwin Holdings, materials Stone River's audit team legally pulled through our proxy access. Most of the files were padded fluff, recycled talking points. But one deck, one slide really, froze me. It was mine. Not inspired by, not based on, mine. The opening sequence, the phrase legacy should evolve or it calcifies. I'd coined that. The design architecture, the staggered graph rhythm, even the animated transition I'd mapped frame by frame on my old laptop. It was all there. But the name on the file? Brannon. Darwin Board, Q4. Strategy deck, prepared by Brannon Dunning. They didn't just erase me, they Xeroxed me. I opened the original draft from my cloud archive, laying them side by side on my screen like a crime scene photo and its forgery. The comparison made my stomach knot, but not from shock, from precision. They hadn't even bothered to rewrite the language, just repackaged it with a glossier intro slide and Brannon's smug face on the closing. I recorded a voice memo to myself, something I did now instead of screaming. They couldn't build better, I whispered, so they stole louder. The next day, I opened an old folder in my inbox labeled Gala Footage. I didn't need to revisit that night, but something pushed me. A need to remember, not the fall, but the framing. It was the company's end-of-year celebration, just weeks after I'd signed the silent exit. I was still being polite, still showing up when invited, like a dog who hadn't realized the gate was shut behind her. Brannon had taken the stage to warm applause. Then came the funny moments montage, a Darwin Holdings tradition. Everyone leaned in, expecting clips of office karaoke, baby photos, the usual fluff. Instead, there I was, on screen, tripping over a mic cord during a product pitch rehearsal 2 years ago. The video had been edited with clown horns, literal clown horns, zoomed in freeze frames on my fall. Laughter rose around the room like smoke. Zinnia leaned toward Valora, who was already smirking. "At least she's got a sense of humor," Zinnia said, sipping her rosé. I hadn't laughed. I just clapped along, quiet, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. When they can't outbuild you, they outlaugh you. A week later, I called Carrie, one of the few marketing execs who hadn't entirely sold her spine to Brannon. We met at a coffee shop off Mockingbird Lane, one of those quiet spots where everyone pretended they weren't listening. "I always knew it was yours," she said after I showed her the deck. "Then why didn't anyone say anything?" She looked down at her latte. "Because Brannon told the board you'd moved on, said you gave it to him, that you wanted out. He framed it like mutual consent." I smiled at her. Not out of kindness, out of clarity. "Don't worry," I said. "You're not the target. You're just part of the case file." That night, I opened my hard drive, pulled every version of that strategy deck I ever created. Original drafts, time-stamped backups, even my first hand-scribbled mind map, and uploaded them to a secure IP registry. No one would overwrite my voice again, not without a digital trail loud enough to scream in court. Finally, I drafted an email. 2. Selfostone River. Secure. Subject. Backup body. In case of dispute, refer to file Genesis slide 01. I hit send. Then, as I shut down the monitor, I whispered to the darkened glass around me. "If they're brave enough to keep lying, I'm ready to tell the truth, in sequence." The video played in the background while I sipped my black coffee. I didn't need to watch the full presentation. I had memorized every frame of it when I first built it. But hearing my voice narrate the slides, the same voice that was once deemed too unpolished for the boardroom, felt like justice finally clearing its throat. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. Truth layered over silence. Proof in pixels. The screen dimmed as the video ended. I closed the tab and glanced down at the folder beside me, labeled Holdings Undisclosed Voting Assets. Tapping it open, I read the latest breakdown from our internal analysts. Stone River Ventures now held 6.7% of Darwin Holdings, acquired silently, strategically, piece by piece through investment arms no one traced back to me. I replayed my CFO's voice from our lunch meeting earlier that week. "They've got no idea," she'd said between bites of kale salad. We've bought into them under 4 different firms. You're holding the boardroom door key. They just haven't noticed it's missing. I smiled then, the same way I was smiling now. They taught me structure, I told her. I applied it better than they ever did. My phone buzzed. Downstairs at the front desk, a courier had left an envelope with my name. No sender, no branding. Curious, I went down, signed for it, and opened it in the elevator. Inside was a single thumb drive. No label. Just a note on torn stationery. Some of us remember what you really did for the company. Use this well. Back in my office, I plugged it in. The files were old, board minutes from 4 years ago, internal emails between Brannon and the operations lead. But one chain stopped me cold. It was a conversation during my final project cycle. I had been preparing a market launch plan, one that projected a 22% growth increase over 2 fiscal years. It had been shelved, publicly due to budget priorities. Privately, Brannon had emailed the COO. She's getting too much attention. Let's shift the launch date and let it stall out. Say it wasn't ready. He didn't just sabotage my idea, he ensured it never saw daylight. I stared at the screen. My face didn't change, but my chest burned. They thought I walked away, I murmured. I just started walking smarter. Later that week, I scheduled a closed-door meeting with my legal counsel and internal strategy team. The location was quiet, a conference suite at a boutique law firm we'd used before for litigation against hostile ventures. We reviewed the Stone River Holdings portfolio. Counsel spoke first. Once this goes public, he said, tapping a highlighted clause, the voting rights activate. You'll be entitled to representation, maybe more, but it'll trigger scrutiny. That's fine, I said. You'll have to face the family, he added, more cautious this time. Publicly? I leaned forward, folding my hands. I've been ready since the day they edited me out of my own story. No one said anything for a beat. Then he nodded. The team started finalizing the SEC filing. That evening, I returned to my office, set down my briefcase, and opened the desktop panel hiding the secure drive. Logged into the encrypted terminal. One file waited for me. Phase 2. Stakeholder realignment. I opened it. In the quiet hum of the room, I whispered to the screen. Time to make the shareholders remember who I am. At 6:45 a.m., I padded barefoot through my home office, a fresh mug of black coffee in one hand and a quiet certainty in the other. The blinds were still drawn halfway, the city below only beginning to stir, but my dashboard was already glowing with a soft green banner. Stakeholder realignment, phase complete. It was done. Every piece of the structure they thought belonged solely to them had shifted, quietly, invisibly, and now, unmistakably, under my influence. All I needed now was the right stage. The stage came, as expected, in the form of a thick, ivory envelope dropped at my door later that morning. It was sealed with the Darwin Holdings crest, a detail so overused it no longer felt prestigious, just pretentious. The name printed on the front, Kaylin Dunning, independent consultant. I didn't even blink, just opened it slowly. Inside was the seating chart for the upcoming 50th anniversary banquet. My name was listed at a back table. Table 22. Support staff and partners. Near the kitchen doors. The message wasn't subtle. They still wanted me in the room, but not at the table. Not at the front. Certainly not where I belonged. My eyes scanned downward. Zinnia Dunning, Chief Creative Legacy Officer. Legacy. That word again. Wrapped around the wrong name like a medal on the wrong soldier. I folded the paper, tucked it back inside the envelope, and placed it neatly in my shredder tray. No fury, no flourish, just logic. Interesting title, I muttered, for someone who's never built anything. The next blow came later that afternoon. My assistant, Rena, sent me a screenshot over text, along with a single word. Thoughts? It was a company newsletter post titled Our Founder's Journey, a curated photo album of the company's early days. The second image was my original brand sketch, the one I had drawn by hand at 2 a.m. in my apartment while surviving on coffee and fear. But in the caption, there was no mention of me. Instead, it read, "Original mock-ups provided by our early PR team." And worse, my figure in the photo, standing proudly at the easel, had been cropped. Cleanly, intentionally. By noon, the post was taken down from the website. But not before we archived it. I forwarded the screenshot to our internal legal inbox with the subject line, "Archived." No extra commentary. I didn't need to explain. "They're not just hiding me," I said aloud, alone in my office. "They're replacing me with fiction." I opened my archive folder, updated the file logs, recatalogued the original sketch with time-stamped metadata, including a backup cloud route. Then I opened my voice recorder. "Phase 3, I said quietly. "Narrative disruption. Target, controlled legacy." I didn't reply to Zinnia's manipulation. Didn't comment on the seating insult or the erasure. I prepared. Carefully. Thoroughly. This was not about screaming over the noise. It was about turning their own volume down to silence. Later that evening, while the light faded into amber behind the skyline, I reviewed the final asset plan for the gala. We had our own server space. We had permissions granted. And we had the one thing they didn't know we possessed, full control of the AV queue. I opened the event email, scrolled to the bottom, and clicked the RSVP link. "Will you attend?" the screen asked. Yes. Under additional notes, I typed, "Please ensure the AV system is tested. I may have something to share." Then I hit send. What I had to say wouldn't fit in their slideshow, but it would stay in their memory. The air outside the Rosewood Mansion was colder than usual for a Texas autumn night. Not cold enough for a coat, but just enough to make the silence on the drive over feel heavier. I stepped out of the car in a tailored black suit, pressed sharp like my focus. This wasn't a celebration. It was a board meeting in disguise. As I approached the entrance, I could already hear the laughter inside, thick and hollow like canned applause. The valet took my keys, and I offered him a small nod. Nothing performative, nothing extravagant. I wasn't here to perform. Inside, the lighting was soft gold, curated for flattery. Every detail screamed legacy. The wall of portraits, the chandelier polished to its last crystal, the live string quartet quietly reciting Bach in the background. But this was not my music. This was their ceremony, a shrine to themselves. "Kaylin!" someone called behind me. Darvin's executive assistant, tight smile, perfectly rehearsed. "So good to see you again." "Likewise," I said, walking past him before he could guide me to table 22. I already knew where they had placed me. Back row, support staff, barely in view of the main stage. Instead, I kept walking. I bypassed the ballroom, moved through the private corridor, and reached the side door leading to the executive boardroom. The same room they'd once asked me to vacate for optics. Tonight, it was quiet. The chairs were filled, but no one spoke when I entered. Only Brannon shifted slightly in his seat. Darvin looked up, adjusting his cufflinks. "Kaylin," he said, calm but firm. "This is a closed session, shareholder level." I placed my laptop on the table and opened it. "Good," I said. "Then I'm exactly where I belong." The screen behind me lit up as I connected the projector. One slide filled the space. Simple, undeniable. Stone River voting block. 51% confirmed. A silence landed like a dropped plate. Brannon leaned forward, mouth parting, unsure if he should play dumb or play mad. Darvin sat back slowly. Valora stiffened beside him, her glass of Chardonnay suddenly still. I clicked the remote again. A video began to play. My voice narrated over slides, the same deck Brannon had presented 2 years ago. Only this time, it was time-stamped. My initials in the metadata, my voice explaining the growth model, my face appearing in the reflection of a slide marker. "That's outdated," Brannon said, clearing his throat. I didn't look at him. I looked at the board. Then why are you still using the same format, the same data, and even the same transitions? A board member to my right whispered, "She's got chain of authorship." I closed the laptop gently. I didn't need to raise my voice. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to restructure." Valora opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Zinnia tried to recover, leaned in with a half smile. "Kaylin, we all played a role in building this company. You've had the mic for a decade," I said, cutting her off. "You never built a thing. Sit down." She sat. For a moment, all I could hear was the low hum of the projector fan and the distant echo of violins from the banquet hall. I looked at each face around the table, no longer feeling like the outsider, the afterthought. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope, thick, heavy, the weight of decisions. I placed it in front of Darvin. "Effective immediately," I said. "Interim CEO appointment filed. Independent audit scheduled. Full reorganization begins Monday." He didn't move, and I didn't wait. They built the walls, I installed the doors, and now I held the only key. By the time I returned home, the headlines had already begun to shift. Not by my hand, yet, but by gravity. The kind that follows truth after it's been anchored, documented, and projected on a 30-foot screen in front of an entire board of cowards. The banquet had ended hours earlier, but silence still pulsed louder than any applause. I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and dropped my bag on the counter. I wasn't tired. I was alert, watching, waiting for the next tremor beneath their facade. My phone buzzed. Subject, FWD, Crisis Comms Plan, Blame Framework, no sender, no context. Just a thread of emails. I tapped the first one open. From Brannon Dunning. To Zinnia Dunning. Darvin CC, PR Strategy Team. Time 6 weeks ago. The message read, "If Kaylin resurfaces, we frame the failed Singapore deal as a result of her absence. We imply she had prior involvement, vague but believable. Let the public assume she left things unfinished." My fingers tightened around the phone. They hadn't just plotted around me. They were actively weaponizing the space I left behind. Another line from Zinnia. Narrative angle. Her ideas were too big, too early. She left, the market collapsed, and we did our best. Make her the ghost scapegoat. It'll hold up for press. Darvin's response. Approved. Keep the phrasing soft. Let the press speculate. I forwarded the entire thread to my legal team with one sentence. So much for legacy. Later that day, I signed off on the executive name removal orders. Effective immediately, Brannon and Zinnia were stripped from all client-facing accounts, their emails rerouted through my office, their permissions revoked. A formal notice went out to clients. All executive communications will now be handled by Kaylin Dunning, managing partner of Stone River Holdings. We believe in building forward, not hiding backward. The press release followed. I kept it short, sharp, clean. No dramatics, just facts. Brannon called within 30 minutes. I didn't answer. He followed it with a text. "You're gutting the heart of this company," I replied. "No, Brannon, I'm finally removing the cancer." He didn't text back. By that evening, the ripple was reaching the surface. LinkedIn lit up. Old colleagues, some apologetic, some pretending they'd always known. One anonymous message stood out. "You were always the blueprint. They were just good at editing." I screenshotted it, saved it in a folder labeled Artifacts. Social feeds started to buzz. Articles circulated about the silent comeback of a founder once thought forgotten. Comments poured in. Some were bitter, defensive. Others sounded like breath held too long finally being released. Even Miri's teacher tagged me in a post, proud to see women leading where they were once erased. Around 10:40 p.m., my phone rang again. Darvin. I stared at the screen. Let it vibrate once, twice, then fade to missed call. I opened my voice memo app and recorded, "They want my voice now. But they'll only hear what I've already said. In action. I tapped save. I didn't need their words. I had rewritten the record. When I woke, the sky outside was gray, the kind that settles over Dallas when the wind carries more truth than the news. I reached for my phone, still on the nightstand beside a half-finished water bottle and an unopened envelope I hadn't yet found the courage, or interest, to read. The headline flashed across my notifications before the coffee even brewed. Darvin Holdings faces internal audit following stakeholder coup. No exclamation marks, no sensational tone, just a fact. I folded the phone face down on the counter and sipped my coffee in silence. No smile, just certainty. I didn't need applause. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a reckoning long overdue. By noon, I was sitting across from my legal counsel on a secured line. "We got the green light," he said. "You can submit the audio." I didn't hesitate. I opened the private drive, pulled the file marked Legacy, Grandfather, Final, .mp4a, and hit share. Years ago, I'd recorded a conversation between myself and my grandfather, the founder of Darvin Holdings. He was already half retired then, but sharp enough to see what I didn't. The audio clicked to life. "Kaylin," he said, "if anyone ever ruins what you built, fix it. Don't ask for permission, just show the receipts." That clip, authenticated, archived, now joined the official board record. He gave me more than vision. He gave me permission. By evening, I sent out a document that had taken 6 months of blood and restraint to finalize. A 38-page audit labeled Inherited versus Earned, Post-Dynasty Findings. It tracked every major decision made by Darvin's executive team in the last decade. Side by side, it showed growth comparisons with Stone River's lean, data-driven strategy. In cold numbers, we had tripled their performance in half the time, without legacy debt or name recognition. The report hit the board's inboxes at 5:02 p.m. sharp. Within minutes, I got a private message from one of the oldest members on the board. "If you ever want the official CEO title, I'll nominate you myself." I didn't reply. I bookmarked it. By end of day, the fallout began. Zinnia released a vague press statement about pursuing personal ventures and stepped down from all operational duties. Brannon was placed under review for procedural discrepancies related to executive communication and data transparency. And Darvin? He didn't show up to the Zoom call. His square on the screen remained black, labeled D. Dunning, Chair Emeritus. A void, fitting for a man who'd spent more time sculpting his own image than building anything of substance. I stared at that blank box longer than I meant to. No words, just results. Later that night, just as I was preparing to log off, a courier rang the intercom. He handed me a slim, handwritten envelope. No return address, no stamp. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Darvin. I turned it over in my hand, thumb tracing the edge of the paper. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked to the bookshelf behind my desk and pulled out the lockbox that held my first business license. The same one he once refused to frame because it didn't align with the company brand. I placed the letter inside. Closed the lid. Some legacies aren't handed down. They're wrestled back, piece by piece, document by document, one unspoken truth at a time. Not all closure comes with conversation. Some just comes with ownership. The rooftop of my building had become my sanctuary, high above the noise, far from the voices that once tried to define me. This morning, the Dallas skyline stretched endlessly, sun breaking over the horizon in slow defiance, as if it too had something to prove. I wrapped my hands around a mug of black coffee, let the heat center me. The envelope from Darvin still sat unopened in the safe. I hadn't touched it. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Some truths didn't need to be read. They needed to be let go. I placed the letter back in its place, beside my original LLC license, the first document I ever signed, without my father's name printed anywhere. And in that quiet, I felt something rare. Peace. "Sometimes forgiveness isn't about them," I whispered. It's about freeing yourself from waiting for what they'll never say. 2 hours later, I met Isley for coffee. We chose a quiet cafe tucked away from downtown, the kind with handwritten menus and cracked leather seats. She looked older than I remembered, but in the best way. Worn in, not worn down. We talked for hours. We laughed. And for the first time in years, it wasn't forced. She leaned forward toward the end, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "So," she asked, "now what? You've taken it all back." I stirred my drink slowly, watching the cream swirl. "Now," I said, "I build something that doesn't require my last name to matter." She nodded, and there was something in her eyes. Relief, maybe. Or just recognition that I wasn't going backward. Later that week, I moved into a co-working space in Deep Ellum. No name on the door, no title on the wall. I didn't need either. The walls were blank. The people were young, hungry, rough around the edges. And they reminded me of myself before I'd learned how easily things could be taken. I sat with a small group of women, first-time founders, each holding some version of a dream everyone had once called too small or too scattered. I didn't teach them to fight. I taught them how to build armor. One of them asked, "What if someone steals my pitch?" I smiled. "Then you out-execute them so loudly, they choke on your dust." That night, I came home to a package. Inside, a folded card in handwriting I recognized immediately. Mire. "Auntie Kay," it read in crooked letters. "I told my class about you. You're the coolest CEO." That was the only family voice I needed. I placed the card on my desk, beside the plaque they once refused to give me. I ran my fingers over her words and felt something sting behind my eyes. I didn't cry, but I did whisper, "Maybe one day, that little girl won't have to ask why her aunt didn't go to work like Daddy." 2 days later, an email arrived from an event organizer I hadn't spoken to in years. Subject: Keynote Invitation, National Innovation Summit. They weren't inviting me back to the board. They were handing me the stage. I sat for a long time with the email open, the cursor blinking under my name. Then I laughed, soft, from the gut. "They finally want my voice," I murmured. "And this time, I'll choose what it says. The past may have written the introduction, but the epilogue is entirely mine. The stage wasn't unfamiliar, but this time, it was mine." San Francisco's Moscone Center buzzed with the quiet anticipation that precedes something people don't realize they need to hear. The National Innovation Forum had packed its main hall for the keynote, and I stood just off stage, watching the technician adjust my slides. I wasn't introduced as anyone's daughter. I wasn't labeled former VP of anything. On the program, beneath my name, it simply said, "Kaylin Dunning, founder, Stone River Ventures." When I walked out, I didn't hear applause as validation. I heard it as acknowledgement. I clicked the remote. Slide 1 appeared. The title of my talk, bold and clear. Ownership without permission. They quieted. I spoke. "Success," I began, "is not about being allowed in. It's about building the doors when they keep them shut." The audience leaned in. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Each slide was anonymous in design, but unmistakable in truth. Internal memos stripped of logos, timelines showing erasure, metrics tracking underperformance beside silent acquisition milestones. I narrated like I was reciting a history I no longer flinched at. And when I reached the final slide, the lights dimmed slightly. A single image filled the screen. Me, standing alone beneath the Stone River banner, surrounded by women engineers, marketers, and founders, each one having once been told, "This isn't your place." I ended with a quote from my grandfather no one in that room had ever heard. "Don't ask for permission, just show the receipts." I closed the laptop. The standing ovation was thunderous, but I didn't smile until I was off stage. By mid-afternoon, headlines surged across major media outlets. Kaylin Dunning destroys dynasty in viral keynote. Stone River founder delivers sharpest message, yet to corporate legacy gatekeepers. One clip made the rounds faster than the rest. My line from the second slide. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a takeover, it's showing them you never needed their kingdom. The fallout at Darwin Holdings was swift. 3 board members stepped down within 48 hours. 2 gave prepared statements about supporting the future. One simply said, "She earned it." No one heard from Darwin himself. But paparazzi caught him leaving through the back door of a private club in uptown Dallas, eyes hidden behind sunglasses, no comment offered. Back at my office, my assistant walked in, holding a manila envelope. "This just came in," she said, laying it on my desk. "From your father's personal assistant." I flipped it over. The letter was addressed formally, to Kaylin Dunning, subject advisory role inquiry. I let my fingers rest on the seal for a moment. Then I said calmly, "Mark it unread and archive it, for memory." She didn't ask. She didn't need to. That evening, I stood at the back of the main event hall, watching a new batch of women founders pitch their visions. They fumbled, they paused, they shook, but they stood. They stood, and they spoke. I caught my own reflection in the glass wall beside them. I didn't look like someone who won. I looked like someone who never stopped building. And that was the difference. I didn't win by proving them wrong. I won by becoming undeniable. This is where the real legacy begins, one that never needed their name.